Hang on. There it is. We are recording.
This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the provisions therein as extended by an act relative to extending certain state emergency accommodations, which was signed into law on July 16, 2022. These provisions suspend the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call this meeting to order of the Triton Regional School Committee on January 19th, 2023 at 6 p.m. I am Linda Lukovsky, Chair of the School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Susanna?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Caitlin?
Here and I can hear you.
Matthew?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Paul Lees?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Nerissa?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Superintendent Brian Forget.
Here and I can hear you.
Director of Finance and Operations, Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Director of Curriculum, Instruction and Assessment, Anna Bates.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Director of Student Services, Shannon Nolan.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Director of Technology, Greg Kuwick.
I'm here and I can hear you.
For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website, identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attended by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I'll read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families in the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Oral communications from the public. The next item on the agenda is the public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so by raising your hand on the video call using the raise hand option on the participant screen. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments. And remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. The public comment policy language on the agenda states members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Would anybody like to address the committee? Seeing no hands.
No hands.
The next item is the presentation of the FY24 budget proposals, and I'll hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Linda. So again, we're here for night 3. Again, thank you to the principals for being here, and as well as Athletic Director Tim Alberts for being here over the last 2 nights. Tonight, you're going to hear, I think, some of the things we spoke about over the last 2 nights, more in the district aggregate. You're going to hear about curriculum, you're going to hear about technology district-wide, about student services, and then Kyle will speak to kind of the overall general operations of the district. So I'm not going to say anything. I think, well, I'll have more to say a little bit here and there, but I think we'll get right to it. Certainly tonight, I think is a bit more somber in the numbers that we have to present to you, we're having one of those years, unfortunately, as far as the sunk costs that we have going into the new year. So I'm going to hand it off. We'll go, I think makes sense to go right in the order that was listed on board docs. And so we'll tee it up with Greg Kulowick.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Hopefully you had time to look through everything in the budget. I'll kind of go through and identify some key themes in this year's budget, key changes and requests, a little bit of kind of thinking of planning moving forward, and then see what questions you have. So the big themes in this year's budget in the tech department is continuing to expand the one-to-one Chromebook model. Last year, we implemented cycle 1 of a 4-year and then a kind of 4-year ongoing cycle. So one of the lines in the request is for an increase to maintain this program and have cycle 2, where 25% of the students in the district will get a new Chromebook next year, and then have that for the next 4 years of their instance in Triton. Another thing we're doing that is a little bit different is I'm looking to address some equity across 3 elementary schools, where currently 2 of the 3 elementary schools have a Chrome-based lab that are based out of the library. So there's a slight increase in a request for elementary Chrome-based labs to get one at Pine Grove, because currently Newberry and Salisbury have a Chrome-based lab for the elementary students. The other thing we're trying to do, and you may have noticed it in a couple of hardware lines, where specific hardware leases that fell off are not being refreshed, and that money is being allocated to a single line of improving and kind of mapping out long-term improvements for the network. So we've been doing a lot of evaluation work this year with our network partner, Custom Computer Specialists. They've come in and evaluated our wireless network infrastructure. They're looking at our backup infrastructure, looking at our switches and anything hardware related in our network. And so we're working with them to map out a kind of multi-year plan. So a lot of those hardware lines that were not refreshed, that are showing on 23 as a multi-$1,000 lease payments, they're now showing it as zeros, because we're going to allocate all that money to long-term kind of network project planning and evaluation with Custom Computer Specialists. The other thing I did was worked kind of really extensively with Kyle. And I appreciate the help, Kyle, in trying to present a more accurate and like really transparent budget in terms of the lines. And in the past, like a lot of things were clumped together in really kind of like unclear leases. So we're trying to, we spent the year kind of unpacking that. So you'll see some lines that were combined into like existing Chromebooks or legacy Chromebooks or staff devices. So what we look to do kind of moving forward is make it really clear of lines for student Chromebooks, lines for staff desktops, lines for laptops. So it's really transparent in terms of where the money's going. So I think we've started that process of making it more accurate. In terms of the personnel, there's no changes. It's the same from 23 to 24. What I'm thrilled with is that we're finally fully staffed in the department. We lost a really kind of talented staff member, but we brought a new staff member on who has extensive background in technology. He's worked in hospitals, worked all over in various fields of technology, and it's been an outstanding fit in our department. So we have 2 level 2 technicians who are handling now as a team to solve problems with our systems and our infrastructure and all the kind of higher level stuff. Then I have 2 outstanding level 1 technicians that are making our Chromebook program run seamlessly, ridiculously organized, no more stacks of broken devices, like really high functioning department now, which is just awesome to see. Key changes in this year's budget. One, I already mentioned the $50,000 increase request to fund cycle 2 of our Chromebooks. And while last year I asked for the $50,000 due to cycle 1, this year I'm asking for $50,000 due to cycle 2. Long term, that is ultimately going to be offset by kind of existing Chromebook leases that will be falling off. So while it looks like this, increase year over year, those, kind of sporadic leases of 300 Chromebooks here, 120 Chromebooks there, those will be going away, and they'll kind of be like really replaced in an organized method with cycle 3 and 4 moving forward. Other changes is we're ready. We're probably about a month away from rolling out our online registration portal through Aspen. So you can see there's a approximately $7,600 line increase to pay for the per student licensing and the implementation fee, the one-time implementation fee of the online registration. That's going to go into effect in March. We're going to do stress testing in February. So all of the new pre-K and K students in the district will register online through Aspen, as well as any other new student coming into the district on a rolling basis from the summer and then all the way throughout the school year. There's also a line that might stand out. It's Know Before. So Know Before is a cybersecurity, phishing, and security training tool that we've implemented in the district. That is it looks at like approximately $10,000 new line item. The reality is we had a tool that was being underutilized and wasn't built for education at all. We pulled that out of our software line. So our software services line went down significantly. We pulled that tool out, put a single line item for Know Before, which is a really powerful tool that sends out randomized phishing campaigns to teachers. And we've seen the click-through rates drastically drop as we've done campaign 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's just something we have to have in place. And then as we develop our comfort internally in the tech department with that system, we'll be able to start implementing cybersecurity and phishing training that's also embedded right inside of Know Before. There's a savings as well for web-based software. We were to kind of swap out overly priced kind of non-education based tools for really reasonably priced tools. And then we've cut things that were just kind of redundant now with custom computer managing our network, monitoring tools that we just simply don't need anymore. So there was a bit of a savings there as well. Moving forward, I kind of highlighted it already, but we're not refreshing a lot of hardware that's in, kind of embedded in our network. The leases have expired. The hardware still has life, so we don't need to refresh them. But what we do want to do is work with Custom Computer to map out like a 5-year plan to improve and refresh our wireless infrastructure and our general network infrastructure, and keep looking for ways to improve our network and all the infrastructure across the district. Also moving forward, I think it's not in the FY24, but it will have to be maybe in 25 and 26, just to like really start thinking ahead, is that we'll have to come up with a plan to address the AV and projection and smart board needs across the district. Like Pine Grove is getting to the point where all those classrooms could potentially start needing a refresh. In Newberry Elementary, they have decade-old smart boards. The same thing could be said for Salisbury and in the middle school and high school. And there's never been a really specific item or kind of like multi-year planning like we've done for the Chromebooks to refresh smart projection, interactive screens in classrooms. So that's not something we're dealing with this year, but it will likely have to come down the road. So that is everything I have to possibly say about the tech department budget. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any for me at this point.
Does anybody have any questions for Greg? Greg, I want to say that I'm very impressed with this budget, and I appreciate the long-term planning that you're doing to help save the district money.
Thank you. I would say lots of help from Kyle and Brian on that one as well.
Well, it takes a village, like I always say.
And I want to say too, echoing what Greg said, is that the technology team that is in place right now, including Greg and his leadership, is a significant change from where we were if we look back several years. And it is certainly, we've always had competence from a technical standpoint, but we now have a leader in Greg who is an educator first and a technician, if you will, second. And so under his leadership, the department has taken a shift to being entirely about supporting the work that we are doing, which whether I'm sitting in my office or I'm in a classroom or Anna's in a classroom or Kyle's fighting about buses, right? Everything we do is looking back towards what teachers and students do to improve instruction every day. So thank you to Greg for your presentation tonight, but also for your leadership within the department.
Okay, next is curriculum. Anna Bates.
Uh-oh, she can't unmute.
Ah, there it is. All right, good evening, everyone. I I'll start off on the first page of my executive summary. The focus of this budget proposal is similar to that of last year's, which is to continue to provide students with high quality instructional materials and also to provide all of our educators with the professional learning that they need in order to skillfully implement those materials. Just a little history over the last, let's see, since 2017, we've had 5 major content areas that have updates in their frameworks at the state level. If we went back a year prior to that, we'd add 2 more to that list. So what we're really trying to do is make sure all of our curriculum is aligned with the state framework supported by high quality materials. Let's see, and the pandemic, as it threw a little wrench in everyone's plans, it also did with curriculum adoption as well. So we are playing a little catch up in some of those areas. And I can talk about that in a little bit when speaking about social studies, where our implementation of materials was kind of split, where we got some grade levels aligned and now we're still working to get some more aligned. One thing that will be coming down the pike, and I think Patrick spoke about last night, is that hopefully soon we will have a new comprehensive health framework. So we still don't have a date for that. And all we know is it will be supporting physical health, and I'll have some social emotional competencies in there as well. But that's sort of the next content area that's coming towards us. One thing, and I believe I had this on there last year too, just important to note that most of our resources now have an online component, which is a wonderful thing for a number of reasons in terms of providing access and scaffolds to students to access materials. But they also come with online, like an annual subscription cost. And some of them we pay each year, some of them we pay over a series of years. And this particular year, we had a couple of our multi-year subscriptions end. So this proposal now contains sort of something we haven't seen for the last 5 years because it's been embedded within a previous line item. All right, so on page 2, you'll see our most recent curriculum adoptions and then also proposed resource adoptions for this year. 2021, we aligned our 9th grade curriculum with the most recent 2018 framework, as well as we had grade 6 and 7. We pulled in empowering writers before we had a comprehensive ELA curriculum. And then this current school year, we are implementing CKLA in grades K through 5. So this year for proposed resource adoptions, it looks like, I think, more than it is, because some of them are some very small grade levels. Is we're looking to get some mathematics resources into our pre-K classrooms, social studies resources to support instruction in K through 5, where I noted before we've aligned from grade 6 up. We're currently piloting in ELA materials in grades 6 through 8, and then also world language materials in grade 8 and 9. Those Patrick and Al both spoke about last night. Those resources are actually budgeted for within the school budgets for world language, but the others are included in this proposal. All right, so this year, we are still working on implementation of CKLA. I think it's very important that we continue to support CKLA beyond year 1 with professional development. So I have included in this budget proposal PD sort of moving forward, not as extensive as year 1, but making sure that we do this right, that we give the teachers everything that they need to implement this the way that it was designed to be done. Also in grades 6 through 8, we're piloting EL education and Amplify, hoping to have a recommendation from the piloting committee by April. And this budget includes resources as well as PD to support those resources. We also are in stage 1 of our curriculum review process for mathematics. We currently have a group pre-K through 12 meeting to do a comprehensive assessment of where are we in mathematics instruction, where are students, And what do we need to do moving forward? So out of stage one of our curriculum review process, becomes an action plan. So I anticipate having an action plan to support improvement within this area. Not a curriculum adoption within this area, but what do we need to do to move our practices in this area forward? And then also out of curriculum review processes for the past couple of years, we had visual and performing arts is in stage 2. Social studies was one that kind of got kicked down the road a little bit with the pandemic, but we're bringing that group back together. And the World Language Curriculum Review Committee is also in stage 2, and we have recommendations for purchase of materials to support those content areas as well. All right, so if we, let's see, move on to page 4. You'll see a couple of the line items, EL services and EL supplies, have been moved into the student services budget. And then you can see changes in a few of these line items, the most significant being professional development in service, as well as instructional materials and texts. So the increase in professional development in service is, it includes professional development for implementation of CKLA, the second year. It includes some funding to support action steps that will come out of the mathematics curriculum review. It also contains PD funds to support collaborative problem solving that we were able to fund this year out of ESSER funds. But I would like to say there's potential for us to be awarded some grant funding to support some of this. The continued implementation of CKLA through the implementation of high quality instructional materials grant. I also have another grant written to that might support the implementation of co-teaching as an evidence-based practice. And that award would allow us to use some Title II or IV funds to support some of the professional learning that's included in this line. The other one that I noted with a significant increase is instructional materials and text. So that's much higher because it's due to the end of a 6-year license for Inspire Science. So we need to pay for new licenses for that. It includes the grades 6 through 8 ELA curriculum, resources to support pre-K math instruction, elementary music, which has been funded at 2 of the elementary schools through the PTA over the past year. And then a small amount to support our STEM programming. So once again, I do have some grants out trying to help us with this area. One is accelerating literacy through high quality instructional materials, and that could support the 6 through 8 ELA curriculum. It's the same grant that we were awarded last year that helps support the implementation or the purchase of materials for CKLA K through 5. So just if you take a look at page 6, I expanded on this a little bit. It's more than was there last year. I think previously we had just had the entitlement grants on there with starting off with Title I, in which we did see an increase in funds this year. Title II for, and then an early childhood entitlement grant as well. But what I did add on here was some other grant funding that we have been able to use over this past year. And as I said, I'm looking forward to the potential for being awarded some other ones. So we did receive a grant for accelerating literacy learning with high quality instructional materials. Some funds, it wasn't exactly a grant, but the state paid directly to our vendor, iReady, for accelerating mathematics for students. The ESSER funding on here is a significant amount that includes all summer programming, instructional materials, wraparound services. There's a lot that's placed in there. And then recently, in the beginning of the school year, so we have a new special programs coordinator, Katie Zarba, who came on board, wrote her first grants, and we got $100,000 to support her after school programming, which is wonderful. And then we also have a McKinney-Vento grant that we have been awarded to support our homeless families. So although there is a lot, there's a big ask here from the district and the budget, that just know that I'm actively seeking other funding sources as well to help support these purchases. Does anyone have any questions about any of this proposal? Be happy to answer them.
Narissa?
So thank you for this, Anna. I have two quick questions. One, the world languages update is only listed for grades 8 and 9. I know one of the middle school's big things has been re-implementing in grade 7. Can you explain, I guess?
Yeah, so so Al, Patrick and I talked about sort of the best way to roll out new materials. We decided that we wanted to roll them up. Al's hesitancy with starting with 7 is there's been so much flux with that programming that it was a sort of an world cultures class for a year. It was split with French and Spanish. It's quite dependent on hiring a teacher who teaches both French and Spanish, which we are so thankful to have the one that we have right now. But we know that grade 8 world language and sort of a full year of a language is a certain. So that was the reason to support that as a full year course with materials.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is, I know the district kind of as a whole has sought to smooth the costs where possible. Is it, I mean, I guess looking at, paying a one-time lump sum for a 6-year license, that kind of throws a rock in the roadway. Is there any way to divide that and anything else that's like that up so that we can pay it on a more even installment basis?
So yes, and what you actually see here, like if you look at page 8, and can see the line items under instructional materials and text. So that $8,815 is actually for 1 year of Inspire Science licenses. So, and then the same thing, these are all 1 year. So 1 year is obviously cheaper than a 6-year, but the price per year goes up significantly. So like long-term, it would be much better if we could do longer, like a 3-year or 6-year license. But these, I believe, are all 1 year. So Inspire Science is 1 year. We've been doing Math and Focus for 1 year. STEM scopes we do on an annual basis. And the reason is exactly what you're seeing is how can we get that cost down to a more manageable level for our budget?
So I guess maybe this is a Kyle question too, is there a way to sign up for the 6 years, but apportion that somehow annually? I don't know.
We would have to come up with an agreement with the vendor. Some vendors offer that, and like Anna was alluding to, whether they increase the cost or they tack on an interest rate. My understanding, Anna, some vendors do, some vendors don't. Is that correct?
That is true. So some of them, like I will say Inspire Science is McGraw-Hill. They have worked with us in the past and they've allowed us to divide up a subscription over 2 fiscal years. So we pay like on July 1st of the next year, the second half of our payment. And so I could certainly look into that for Inspire, but I'll tell you some of the other big vendors that we use, Pearson, will not do that.
Yeah, I was thinking more locally, not can the vendor agree to take payments from us annually, but is there a way to, let's say that we know that it's a 6-year, right? Can we take and say, or let's say it's a 4-year, right? And it's going to be $100,000 total. Can we put 25,000 in each budget over those 4 years and somehow essentially accrue that locally with the idea that it's saving us the funds?
You know what I'm curious about too, to that point, is if we can do a internally funded loan, right? So we know with our current cash flow that we have significant reserves on hand, but I'd have to look at the legislate. I know you can do a 1 year, but a multi-year beyond that, I'd have to check the legislation. The other alternative would be to go to a lending institution. I mean, rates right now are pretty rough. So I'm curious how that would compare to the increasing costs that the vendor is offering, but very good points. And I think I'll do some digging on that for sure.
Curious, because I know we sought to smooth sort of everything else we can.
Yeah, no, great point.
Thank you.
So just historically, when we adopted these programs, they did let us do that up front. So a lot of these programs, when we the initial spend, they let us spread it over 3 years, 4 years, and in essence, didn't even charge us interest. So that was a nice sweet gig to get us in the door, but now reality hit. So just to confirm that that's clear, there is no, you get the 1 year, you get the 3 year, you get the 6 year, but you're paying it all up front. So that is a change from the past when we adopted these.
Polly's.
And I just had a question about the curriculum frameworks. Doesn't DESE provide those for like the health curriculum?
So yes, we do have curriculum frameworks for health from 1999. That was the last update.
And that's DESE's most recent update?
Yes, so they are,
So-
if you look on the website, they look like they're pretty far in this process, that they've done some work, they've done some development, they put things out for public comment, and then it's been stalled for about 2 years. So nobody's able to answer any questions about when these new ones are actually coming out.
So things like vape and pot. Yeah. All right, I'm done. Thank you. Jeez.
Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And Anna, thank you for all the time on the grants. I know it takes time to look for them and apply to them. We appreciate all that you're doing to help save the money.
Happy to
And-
help if I can.
Next is Student Services, Shannon Nolan.
Hey, so I am going to present the budget for student services. This, as you've heard the past couple of nights, that mental health is, increased need to support students in the area of mental health and academics. So that directly impacts the student services budget. So tonight, when I present, I will focus on what my budget is focusing on is supporting our students, all of our students, to be successful. So the first part, the executive summary, I'm just going to move to the next page because what I have in the executive summary, I will go into more detail moving forward. I'll start with the personnel budget. So the first, as you know, when students' needs increase, that increases the job for our educators in our district. So our ETCs for years have been part-time ETCs and part-time special ed teachers. So they have a caseload of students of facilitating meetings, and they have a caseload for delivering special education services. So the table that I have included, I'm asking for our ETCs this year to move to full-time. If you look at the table that I've included, our elementary ETCs are part-time. The only full-time ETC we have is the high school. And if you notice, their caseloads, elementary caseloads may be lower, but the number of meetings that they have yearly is the same as the full-time ETC, if not more. And that's a result of many times at the elementary level, we're getting initials. That is when most students are referred to special education. Many times those initials, if a student doesn't qualify for special education, they're not on their caseload, but they've had one meeting, maybe 2, 3 meetings for that. It's also the first time many of our families are experiencing special education, so they may need more support through the process. And that's important for the ETCs to be able to support our families through that process. That's when we're building the trust and kind of showing them what special education is and how we can support their student. The other thing that ETCs do is support the staff. So they may have check-ins, PD, weekly meetings, and again, answering questions about the process, just being available. And as you know, in special education, there's so many timelines and timely things that need to be handled right away. And when our ETCs are juggling caseloads of students to deliver special education services plus the ETC caseload, oftentimes services for those students may get canceled because they have to deal with something that needs to be dealt with at that moment. Sometimes deadlines are missed because of the caseload. They just have so much going on. And that, when things like that happen, that causes distrust with families. So to have full-time ETCs and to build that trust is so important. When we had our program evaluation in 2018-19, one of the recommendations was to explore the possibility of making ETCs full-time and giving them greater responsibility and authority with the IEP, staff training, and building-based professional development, and to work collaboratively with the principal in each building. One of the things that ETCs can do is they know those IEPs inside and out. And when you're running a building, scheduling special education services is one of the most important things you can do, because it runs your building. So the ETCs, to be able to support the principals and with the master schedule, with the IA schedules, all those things is a very important part of their job. So to the cost of increasing the ETCs, we have part-time ETCs. So there's a breakdown on what it would cost the districts. It's about $129,000 to be able to make those ETCs full-time. The next request I have is, as Beth spoke about last night, our ALPS program, which is our adaptive learning program for students. That's our students with complex medically fragile needs, and our Triton Learning Center, which is the TLC, which is for students with deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication. Many of them are diagnosed with autism. So those numbers have gone up this year. So we're finding that our therapists, when students meet, one of the criteria for students going into the ALPS program or the medically fragile program, or the TLC program, is that the student has a need for the integration of intensive therapies throughout the day in order to make meaningful progress. So the therapies we're referring to is speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. So a typical caseload for a therapist would be about 30 to 40 students. And our therapists in these programs have to do a lot more, service these students a lot more than students who are outside of a program. So you may see a student maybe one time a week, 1 times 30, or even monthly. But students in a program often are seen 2 to 3 times a week. The therapist is in the program daily, supporting them with their communication devices and kind of integrating what they're learning outside of the classroom, training staff. So our therapists, on top of that, still have to do their testing. They still have to write their reports and attend IEP meetings. So again, those program therapists are finding that their caseloads are getting higher and higher, and it's hard to fit in all the services. So the other part of that is that in the area of speech, our speech and language services, we're seeing at the pre-K level, we're seeing that more students have stayed home during the early years. Maybe more parents are working from home. So instead of going to a structured daycare, they may be at home with their parents. So they're not exposed to language as much. The other thing is, during the pandemic, doing virtual speech services or wearing a mask is obviously very difficult. So we're finding that more and more students at the lower levels are qualifying for speech services. They're staying on longer. And also at the middle school and high school level, we're finding that a lot of students are qualifying for social pragmatics skills, which is something that's coming in a lot. And that does fall under our speech and language therapist. So we're seeing more direct services at the middle school and high school level. So what I'm asking for in this area is a full-time speech and language therapist. And I did write that we were going to use some contracted services to help with covering the cost of that full-time speech and language therapist, but that will have to be reviewed, because my concern is at the high school level, we're seeing so many more direct services that we may need to contract out for services if we continue to see an increase. So that will be solidified before more solidified before the Saturday budget meeting. The other thing I'm asking for is an assistant a part-time assistant occupational therapist to help at NES with the programs, with the OT services in the programs. And I will say in this budget, I have said that the speech and language therapist I'm asking for would be shared between Salisbury and NES. But with that said, caseloads will be reviewed throughout the district to determine where services are needed also, because these caseloads are changing so much, they're increasing. The next is the REACH program. I'm so thankful that you supported the REACH program last year, and we knew it was needed last year, but you never know until you actually put it into place. And we have been able to keep about 10 to 12 students in district and serviced in the REACH program. We have we have 3 students in the referral process at the elementary level right now. And I believe we have 2 at the middle school level. So our social worker has done an amazing job. The principals have worked so hard to communicate, to be able to share her, but we're finding with this need for our students for the therapeutic support, you know, when you're in a therapeutic program, not only are you supporting the students, but you're also supporting the families and the staff and the trainings. And with the numbers going up so quickly, I've talked with the principals, and they feel that a full-time social worker, adding a full-time social worker would then give the therapeutic program at PGS a full-time and the therapeutic program at the middle school a full-time. An RBT, so the needs, again, at the pre-K level, students coming in that haven't been in structured programs, we're seeing that there's a lot more behaviors that are popping up. So we don't want to refer these students to out-of-district placements or to district programs so quickly, because oftentimes they need just support and training from staff. In our 2 district BCBAs, we have 1 BCBA that works with our TLC and ALPS program, and then our other district BCBA is across the 4 buildings. So she often doesn't have time. If there's a behavior that's popping up at one school, she has a schedule of consults she has to do. So if so I'm asking for an RBT. An RBT is like an assistant BCBA. She would work under the BCBA to be able to go in, train the staff, and support, you know, if there's a behavior that pops up, she'd be able to go in for 2 weeks into a school and train the staff and support that student and determine if they can be successful in that environment or they need a more restrictive environment. So the district BCBA, the one thing that we looked at, Kyle and I did a lot of analysis of our contracted services, a deep analysis of our contracted services. And in 2021, we spent $80,000 on these BCBA services because of summer school, because of home services, and just because of the behaviors and the supports needed within the district. So in order to, as we know, when we pay for contracted services, it's a lot more expensive because you're paying hourly, you're paying another agency. So to fund this behavior technician, we, instead of having to contract out, if we had an RBT within districts, so if we pulled some of the 50,000 from that line and would be able to support that RBT. And then we did leave some still in the line to help us with home services, because the home services still have to be overseen by a BCBA, and often our BCBAs are unable to do that. And then a school psychologist, as you know, coming out of the pandemic, we've had many more referrals. Last year with testing, with referrals from family parent referrals or school teacher referrals, we did spend around 75,000 on contracted services for school psychologist testing. So we were able to cover that through savings through funding it through other savings in the budget, but knowing that we most likely will not have that moving forward. We're still continuing to see referrals. We're also seeing a lot of outside neuropsych assessments, which when that happens, our school psychologist often has to attend the meeting, present the report, and we often do our own testing. So that's on top of what the school psychologist would usually do. They often have to then do more testing on top of to support that neuropsych that came in from outside. So I'm asking for a part-time school psychologist just to help with the testing, so that, as I said, contracting out, it costs so much more money. And then the last position, the last is just, I guess they're like placeholders, because we are seeing that students moving into the district may come in with a one-to-one already on their IEP, or a student moving from, say they were in Salisbury and they move into our therapeutic program or our TLC program, and they need a higher level of support, but that support there's no room within the program. We often have to hire an IA or so to have those in the budget, to be able to say, you know, we have that in the budget, a placeholder to hire those IAs if needed. So the next, I know that's a lot. The next part of the budget is the budget line item requests. And I will highlight, I'm going to go through and just highlight, review some of the highlights. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. At the end also, there's more details, and I know you've had this packet, so I don't want to go through word for word. So I'm going to start with special education contracted services. As I said, you see a decrease in the contracted services. Kyle and I did an analysis, a deep analysis of funding of recurring expenses that we could find other places to fund those in the budget. One of the things was we were contracting with a teacher of the deaf. And as I said, that costs more money than having that person in our budget. So we were able to hire that teacher and fund that teacher through the high school budget. So that was taken out of contracted services. And what we did with that is we tried to allocate those funds in other areas that we saw increases. We have worked very hard to reduce our Wilson tutoring. The principals have worked very hard to work on groupings of reading services, to work on scheduling, and to determine, so the services really reduced this year. And now we have determined where, again, those services keep popping up, and then we should find staffing, find hire, so that we can bring in special ed teachers to deliver these services rather than contracting out. And as I said, the reoccurring expenses of BCBA, we're asking for the RBT and the speech therapist. So some of those things can be supported by the contracted services. We've added a student services contracted service this year. So there's two things under the student services, is the translation services. That was in Anna's budget last year. That has moved to my budget, and I have increased it because we are seeing an increase of a need for translation services across the board. The other thing that we're adding to this is the last 2 years, we have contracted using ESSER funding. We've worked with the North Shore Consortium, and we've paid for 4 seats on their wraparound team. And the wraparound team works with, so you pay for 4 seats, and that means we have 4 families that can be serviced by this team. And we make the referrals, we meet with the team monthly, and they do things such, they help families outside of the school, which then in turn helps the student be more successful in school. So they do things like crisis support. If the student is in crisis or needs to be called crisis outside, they will help support that student and that family. They help with making medical referrals for counseling, applying for home supports, finding a mentor, completing a mass health application. They act as a liaison between home and schools. They attend IEP meetings, 504 meetings. They've also helped us with school avoidance plans. They come up with the plan and they support that student, trying to get that student in, working from their home and then bringing them to school. So it has been an amazing service that has been supported by the ESSER funding. And so we want to build that into our budget this year. So we've tried to build in 2 seats. So 2 seats would cost $20,000, but it would cost the district around $12,000 because again, we pulled some of the money from the special education contracted services where we were able to support that teacher of the deaf and pulled that money to support the student services, this wraparound service. Home tutoring is level funded this year. Special education supplies, you will see an increase in special education supplies, but again, that will be cost neutral because of the funding we were able to pull from the wraparounds from contracted services. The reason for the increase in special education supplies, the first one is we are now currently looking for, as you know, our ALPS program and our TLC program has grown. We are keeping so many students in district, but one of the things we need is a comprehensive curriculum to support those students, in the way of their of life skills, of academics, collecting data, being able to determine growth. So our new BCBA has really helped us to identify different programs that would be good. The teachers have been working to learn about those programs, have had a chance to pilot some of them. So that is our hope, to be able to have something from the pre-K level to the 18 to 22 level with common language that teachers and students, as they move through the district, will be able to use. The other thing is we currently use the Woodcock-Johnson, which was published in 2001. And is very outdated. And that's for our achievement testing. So when a student is referred for special education, we do achievement testing, and that's the Woodcock-Johnson. So it's very outdated. We have a lot of neuropsychs coming in that are using updated tests, and when our scores are not matching, and it's very difficult to determine services. So we are hoping to move forward and purchase the KTEA, and we're purchasing the digital. We would like to purchase the digital version because in that case, it's easier for teachers to administer, to score, it takes less time. And when a new version comes out, you automatically get the updated version, which is such an important part of determining eligibility for special education, determining progress. And then our ALPS program has students with intense medical needs, and these students require specialized equipment. And as we get them as pre-K, but then they grow into first grade, second grade, they often need new equipment as they grow. So we, in fiscal year 22, the district spent around $22,000 on equipment for the ALPS program. So we want to make sure that we build that into our budget. So you'll see an increase on that line item. Special education transportation shows an increase, and we talked about this last year too. Behavioral support on the vans, in district, out of district. We often need monitors. Some of our students need nursing services on the van for in district and out of district. One of the things that out of district placements have a lot of waiting lists. So we're not able to say, if I have 3 students already in an out of district placement, then I have a student with similar needs. Oh, I'll send them to that out of district placement so they can share transportation. That's not a luxury anymore. We have to, if we need a placement, we have to take the placement where there's an opening. So we often have vans going to different places. An increase in the cost of transportation for NRT has affected that. And we also, NRT has had staffing shortages this year, so we've had to go to smaller companies, which often are more expensive. Our summer programming, you'll see an increase in our summer programming. The table that I've included will show you, when we talk about an increase in needs for our students, well then that kind of, that moves into the summer, because if it's on their IEP, they need, that it's identified that they need supports in the summer also. So in 2019, we had 47 students who needed extended year programming. And in 2023, we're projected to have 77 students. So that's a huge jump, which needs an increase in staffing and supplies and materials. In 2019, we had 62 students receiving tutoring, and in 2023, we have 100 students receiving tutoring. And that table just shows you the increase each year of the needs of the students. We also added a part-time counselor to our summer program this year, which was really needed to support our students, and but that is included in the increase. Professional development. So working with Anna, working with the special ed teachers, looking at the tier 1 programs, we have been able to provide using the ARP money and our ESSER funding, we've been able to provide specialized professional development for our special education students, our teachers, which is huge because they are teaching the hardest to teach students, and they often need that specialized support PD. So I'm asking to add a special education professional development line. It would be cost neutral because it would come out of the contracted services line. But I just really want to continue to be able to provide those services, especially as that PD, especially as we move. I've been working with Anna on the math committee and trying to determine what's needed. And we have to look at those tier 2 and tier 3 services and interventions. And then you will see an increase in out-of-district tuition. And when I'm done, Kyle will jump in to talk about that a little. But we have had a move-in, which will be an increase of about $536,000 for a student who has moved in and requires an out-of-district placement already in that placement. Another contributing factor to the increase is the 14% inflation rate to private school tuitions this year, to all private school tuitions for all public schools. We also did have some staff shortages in our district programs, which did force us to place out a few students. We worked very hard to keep them in, but when it comes down to it, if we couldn't support them, we had to decide on placing them out. But we're fully staffed now, and the staff worked so hard during that time to be able to support the students. Kyle, do you want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, thank you. So the approach we took with the out-of-district line item right now, so you'll see that significant increase over last year of what would be funded by the general operating budget. That's under the traditional funding model that we've established over the last few years, or last 2 years, where we have our total cost base. So this is, if you look on the last 2 pages of the document, page 18 and 19, at the bottom of 18 there is a detail of all the individual placements and the costs associated with those placements. And then the last 5 or so, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line items are the corresponding funding sources that alleviate the general operating budget. Like Shannon was mentioning, we have that potential placement of $535,000. There is the potential that student may not stay with the district, and we may not be responsible. We'll know. We've been on top of that and in open communications. But if we are ultimately responsible for the cost of that programming, the state offers a funding source called extraordinary relief. It's a subset of the circuit breaker fund. And the short of it is, if your out-of-district costs increase more than 125% in a given year, then you would be eligible to tap into this additional funding source from the state. The caveat is that funding source needs to be approved every year as a part of the state's budget. So it's not guaranteed, and we won't know if it's there until the state budget is passed. But under these parameters of this significant of a cost increase, we would, in theory, qualify for that funding source. It would probably be about 375,000 associated with that one placement. So that would offset the increase. And then we also have the opportunity to tap into our reserves if we need to. So different types of reserves we've talked about over the years. We have E&D, excess and deficiency. We now have stabilization. And then we also have reserves in our circuit breaker fund. We would want to, a proposal would include tapping into the circuit breaker reserves, which we have about 1.1 million. And ultimately, those would replenish themselves through the eventual reimbursement from the state of these costs. But to summarize, we've shown this, what the increase would be under our traditional funding model. For the Saturday meeting in a couple weeks, a week and a half, we'll propose a funding plan associated with this that would offset that impact on the general operating budget. So did want to highlight those elements to this.
So if you have any questions, we continue to, we added a out-of-district placement coordinator last year, and she continues to work very closely with the families and trying to bring students back into the district and support those families. So it's changing, weekly. So we'll continue to solidify this as we move forward.
Does anybody have any questions for Shannon? Paulice?
Shannon, great presentation, but this is really more a Brian question. Brian, so you're on the board at the North Shore Consortium.
Mhm.
And it seems that, the staffing shortages in our district are probably being felt by other districts.
Yep.
What's the consortium saying about, people going out of district because we don't have IAs and special ed teachers to handle the workload? I mean, what is the consortium saying? Do they see an expansion of the consortium services?
Yeah.
And I guess the other question is, what drives the 14% tuition increase that the state has approved for these private schools? Is it staffing and labor?
Yeah, so again, 14% is different than the consortium. So I sit on the board at North Shore Consortium and Crest Collaborative. So as members of those consortiums, we send students to those programs. It's roughly half, right? Half of our out of placements are in consortium programs, half are in private placements. The 14% is only on Chapter 766 private schools. So that's the Landmarks, Beverly School for the Deaf. There's a million others, right? So all of those are the schools that are governed under OSD. They have in their statutory right the ability to have OSD set an increase that's allowable. Unfortunately, so MAPS is the Mass Association of Private Schools, so it's private special education schools. They have been lobbying hard over the last couple of years, specifically speaking to the fact that they stayed open throughout the pandemic. So they incurred significant additional costs, have had significant staffing challenges. So that's the reason why there's a breakdown in the a normal increase plus this, and I'm not going to remember the specifics of how they come up to the 14%, but it's broken down into components. So that's just the private schools. The collaboratives are the boards are comprised of school committee members and mostly superintendents. So we get to set the rates. So I know North Shore, we're looking at like a 4.5% increase. That's based largely on the very thing you mentioned. They're fighting this, not fighting the same battle. They're dealing with the same struggle of finding these folks, right? So try and find a social worker right now. Any social worker who's an LICSW with that license, my gosh, they name their price, they can have a job somewhere. So that the struggle we're seeing is no different than what they're seeing. We're all competing from the same pool. The second piece of that is the question about what are they saying about this? The challenge is, and Shannon hinted around this, I don't know if you said it explicitly, we can have a list of kids who we're trying to find placements for, but we have to go where the programs are available. And so there are, Shannon, I believe every time we've been trying to place at a lot of different schools, including both Crest and North Shore Consortium, kids get placed on a waiting list. So then we're having to look further away. It's a farther van ride, or it's a private school, or it's a more specialized school. You know, ideally in the, you know, kind of the order of magnitude, we want kids learning here in our schools, in their community, with their peers. That's the most effective and least restrictive learning environment. Second to that, the collaborative programs are the most local, right? And here, and they've built more and more specialized programs. But ultimately, whether it's the student that Shannon referenced, that, you know, $37,000 for one, that's obviously an incredibly complicated and profoundly disabled individual that requires a lot of care. So those aren't programs that a collaborative or consortium has, right? Those are very specialized programs. So long-winded answer to say it's not a unique problem to Triton, to North Shore Consortium, or Masconomet, or Boston Public Schools. Everyone's dealing with the same thing.
And so we can agree that everyone's chasing the available staff that's out there. And I guess we can use this as a segue into our P&N discussions and full discussions with the committee when we get to that point.
Yeah. And right. So I've sat on the negotiations team for the North Shore Consortium, and everyone's trying to get competitive. And every time someone gets more competitive, it raises the bar. And so it's becoming more and more challenging to be competitive.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Shannon, all I can say is, wow. You know, the amount of need for our students is absolutely incredible. And it's just unfair that we're an educational institution and we're paying more and more for medical type things for students, opposed to the educational part of it. Even though these children need it, it's causing our district and every district in Massachusetts to, you know, ask our communities for more and more help funding this. And I applaud all the work that you and your staff do, Brian, because this is just amazing to me. You know, that this is a side of it we don't see a lot of. So to hear it, it's very sobering, you know.
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, quote a wise woman I once knew, it takes a village, right? And I think at the end of the day, we've got it right. The leaders that are here, my core team here in the district office, incredible leadership, incredible dedication, energy, enthusiasm, endurance, patience, right? All the above. And then the people who are in the trenches, the ETC, the special educators. It is hard work right now. I don't care where you are in a school, but some of the programs that Shannon spoke about are some of the most challenging to work through. So I will say superintendents have been meeting with our legislative core. Our core has shrunk from 5 to 3, but I do know in working with Senator Tarr's office, Harak, who's his chief legal aide, they've drafted a bill that we were hoping was more specific, but in essence, it sets a commission or a study of 71B, which is the MGL chapter that speaks to special education services, IDEA federally, right? 766, all those programs that existed and have existed for 50 years. Massachusetts was always, with 766 was we led the way 50 years ago, but now we've fallen behind in the way that we're funding this. Again, to the point Shannon made, the individual who moved in, who is costing $500,000, there is no argument to say that the student doesn't need or deserve those services. The only thing we're arguing about is what category those fall into and who should be paying for them. And obviously, I think I can speak for everyone on the screen. Those are, if a lot of that cost is intensive medical need, that's a medical cost, plain and simple. That doesn't belong in a school budget. So hopefully, I don't think that's going to be a quick process, but the language that Senator Tar drafted charges a complete study with multiple stakeholders to take a look overall. And that's the work that a small group of superintendents and I have been trying to unpack to get some momentum on this bigger concept of, we have short-term needs, right? There's immediate things we need. We need the state to step up and make a pothole to offset that 14% increase, right? That's a quick one time before that in future years gets offset by circuit breaker. So there are quick needs, and then there's the long-term. So I'm thankful that there's at least a discussion about some of this long-term need and a solution for it. And there is also, I should say, momentum. Actually, the momentum seems to be about including the funding, not legislatively, but because it's a short-term, one-time need, that 14% increase, either through a fiscal 23 supplemental budget or lots of full court press on the new governor and lieutenant governor to include that in their first round of the budget as an offset. It just so happens that the lieutenant governor is a former mayor of Salem who is very close in bringing in the current superintendent in Salem, who we've been working with, trying to capitalize on that relationship. So I'm hopeful. And so I guess the one thing I will say, and I'll stop talking, right? There's a ton of variables in the numbers that Shannon just presented to you. So in every year, there are variables. I can tell you in all my time, I've never seen this kind of fluctuation in variables. So stay tuned. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank
Yes.
you.
All I can say is wow. Next item is the district operations. Is that going to be Kyle?
That's Kyle.
I'll take it from here. Yeah. So you mentioned the word sobering earlier. I apologize in advance. I think a theme where last year was a bit more sunny when we came to the district-wide operations with our budgets and our budgets versus spending patterns. Last year, we were fortunate, actually over the last few years, in light of all the other challenges that we were enduring. One of the bright sides there over the last few years was the one-time savings that we incurred, long-range savings that we incurred, and we were able to take on a number of new initiatives and beef up operations. In this document this year, outlining the themes that we've heard over the last two nights. I think it's the levels of high inflation and how that's impacting our fixed costs as well as our consumables. We have ESSER funding that is now on the tail end of that allowable spending timeline. We've also utilized a significant portion of ESSER. So we have just a small bit left. So we're now working towards transitioning the costs that we want to, or the programs we want to maintain long-term, into our general operating budget. And then also, I'll go over it in a minute too, but we have one of our unions in active negotiations, TRTA, Unit A and B, Unit A being the teachers, Unit B being the instructional assistants. So this document, I'll go through all of those costs. Specifically, the first page here is the summary, what I just covered. Page 2 to 5 is the strategic new programming that we're recommending. Page 6 to 10 is a summary of all the different individual line items. We added that more summarized level compared to the high level of detail and the other ones, because there are so many individual line items here. So jumping right into things from the strategic spending side of things, right there on page 2, the district health and wellness coordinator. This is a position that's been around for about 1.5 years now. Kara Briley is our district health and wellness coordinator. I don't think I need to go into great detail about the incredible things she's done for the district, the amazing initiatives. Lots of these have been shared with the committee directly. I'm sure you've heard about it in the communities, the various programs and events that have run. Certainly been both her as an individual and employee, as well as the programming, has been a tremendous asset for the district. So long range, we would like to maintain this position in this programming. taking a phased-in approach. Right now, her salary is entirely funded by the ESSER grant program. We're proposing a 50% phased-in approach, 50% for FY24, and then the remaining 50% for FY25. Item number 2, stabilization fund transfer. This is in alignment with the financial reserve policy that was adopted by the district back in March of last year, March 2022, where one of the recommendations that was made was a layered approach towards including 2 line items in the budget, one being a stabilization fund transfer, the second being a transfer to OPEB. So the language of that policy stipulated that in FY24, we include a $75,000 line item for a transfer to the stabilization fund. Quick refresher on that too. So at our last meeting, at the last school committee meeting, the committee did approve a $1.5 million transfer over to the stabilization fund. The purpose of that transfer was, even though we're not admitted into the core program yet, the idea behind having the funds there is when we are accepted into the core program, those funds would be available for a feasibility study and the cost associated with that. Might ask the question, if we have $1.5 million in stabilization, why do we need this? I would say to that, it's part of our funding plan that we established. B, with what we're seeing in the inflation environment, the cost of that feasibility study, we can reasonably assume is going to increase. So the more reserves we get over there, the better. And then the third piece being, once we incur the cost for that feasibility study, when we're accepted into the core program, that stabilization fund balance, or a significant portion of it, will go away associated with that cost. And we want to make sure we're developing adequate reserves for the district for financial flexibility and strength in the future. So we've included that $75,000 line item. I'll skip to number 4 real quick before Brian will jump into the elementary performing arts improvements request. But late buses, number 4, we're requesting $79,800 to maintain 4 days worth of late buses at the middle school, high school campus. The transportation operating budget has maintained 2 days a week for the middle school, high school campus. We've been able to offer 4 days because of savings that we've had in that line item associated with buses not running. So we get a credit each month for any buses that aren't running. But we'd like to work this into our long-term plan to offer those 4 days a week. And then also at the elementary school level, we're proposing that there are buses offered at each elementary school 2 days a week. This is actually, this was offered years ago, and then it was cut in prior budgets. So we're looking to have that reestablished. Going back to point 3 there, Brian, do you mind jumping into the detail on the elementary performing arts improvements?
Absolutely. And one thing I want to add about late buses, as we get to the discussions and prioritizing and winnowing down, I know we've always had the discussion about late buses and how much they're utilized. I don't think late buses at the elementary are always going to be packed 55 full, but there are, in speaking with the principals, there are definitely a good number of students who would choose to use those buses and be able to access programming that aren't able to access it now. So again, it's not going to impact 500 kids at every school, but it is impacting students. So at the the proposal here, I had hoped to be a little further along in the planning at this point to give you a more concrete proposal. But if I've been meeting with all of the performing arts teachers, each of the half days, they've been coming together district-wide. So each of the elementary music teachers, instrumental teachers, and Sue and Bob from the high school have been meeting to talk about the performing arts, right? We've had the discussion. It's a program that's been dwindling. Certainly there is the impact of the fact that we were a district of 3,600 students 20 years ago, and we're now a district of 2,200 students. So that obviously has an impact. There's the impact of the competition, or that's not the right word, the conflicts of schedules. I know this was, you had asked the question, Aaron, of Patrick the other night when he was talking about the high school schedule, being able to take a arts course, a performing arts elective, and when it conflicts with something else that's required, when you have the smaller and smaller your high school is, the less sections you have and the less options you have. So when you've got 3 full sections of band and 4 sections of algebra, you've got a lot more ability to play and have some flexibility. But so there are certainly factors that have contributed to this that are about the condensing of our overall population, but there's also participation and there's also interest. So one of the things we talked about is we need to rebuild the program from the ground up, the ground being at the elementary level. And one of the things that used to be the norm was that both classroom music instruction, general music curriculum, instrumental instruction curriculum, and choral instruction was part of the requirement for elementary students. It's ebbed and flowed over the years. It's ebbed and flowed in some schools. It's still exists as a requirement for chorus at Newbury, but not at Pine Grove and Salisbury. So what we talked about was the providing an opportunity where there's a compulsory requirement for students at the elementary level to have all 3 of those components. So K through 6, it would still be, we currently have 5 specials, right? So we've got art, music, PE, and library media. The 5th day of a special, it rotates. So one week you'll double up on music, and then the next week you'll double up on gym, and the next week you'll double up. What we're proposing here would provide, at this point, the assumption is one additional instrumental full-time teacher and some instructional materials costs, rental of some equipment. It's a round figure of $100 that would have to be refined as we go forward if it's able to be funded. But what that would do is both of those additional, so there would be 2 music blocks per week, keeping the instrumental lesson pullouts as they are, dedicating between those 2 sections per week, the ability to have chorus, instrumental, and the lessons and the general music curriculum delivered for all students. So that haven't teased out what grade levels. Obviously, we're not going to have kindergartners in chorus, but is it compulsory chorus 4, 5, and 6? It's a different choral component at the primary level. So those details of exactly what it would look like haven't been teased out. But what we've kind of brought it down to at this point is we believe with 1 additional instrumental staff, full-time instructor, and some materials, we can start to rebuild that program. So that's the thinking. Certainly as that gets teased out, I believe the next time we're all meeting together is February 3rd. February 3rd. And hopefully we'll have a little more clarity about how that would work. Back to you, Kyle.
Thank you kindly. So jumping to page 4 of the document, discussing the personnel cost changes over the current year, looking towards FY24. As we highlighted, we're in open negotiations with TRTA Unit A and B. Down at the bottom of page 4, we're itemizing out 3 different elements of the proposed cost increase here. The first item is the step in COLAs, COLA being cost of living adjustment for all union and non-union staff. You'll notice that's a to the dollar amount, 1.1 million. So included in that amount is an estimate for the costs associated with union staff because they're in open negotiations and we don't have that finalized. And then there's the piece for our non-union staff where traditionally they've received a COLA of 2% each year. So we were able to calculate that amount on existing staff members. We have the column movement, item number 2. That's where our union staff, TRTA unit A and B, have the ability to make lane changes based on credits that they obtain or degrees that they obtain. So we are able to calculate that number now. And then the third item is school choice receiving shortfall. I'll get into it a bit further at the end from the school choice sending cost basis. But we had, looking towards FY24, we have 15 seniors who we are currently receiving school choice funds that are graduating, foreseeably graduating this year. Of those 15, there are a few who we receive special ed increment funds. So not all is just the straight $5,000 per student. A few of them, we do receive significant other funds associated with that. So from a conservative perspective, if all those seniors graduate and we don't admit any new additional school choice funds based on size constraints, or I'm sorry, classroom constraints, we would foreseeably have to fund $150,000 out of our operating budget. That's because the mechanics of school choice, where that funding source, we charge teacher salaries directly to that program. So those salaries will need to the tune of $150,000 will need to be moved over to the general operating budget. So the total projected salary increase we have right now is at the bottom right of that page, 1.3 million. Jumping to page 6, this is again the summary of the individual line items we have within operations. I won't go through every line here, but just some of the highlights on the school committee expenses. We did have a dip there of about $2,800. That's a few different offsetting factors. We have some memberships that the committee pays for. They have a usual increase of between 2% and 5%. And then we also had a portion for meeting minutes that was reclassified to a salary line item rather than being paid out as stipends. Down at the bottom there of page 6, you can see the special education and school committee legal fees. We are proposing to increase slightly there to the tune of $5,500 between the two line items. That's to align with historical costs over the past few years. We expect our expenditures this year and last year have been slightly elevated compared to that. We do expect it to dip back down a bit, but it aligns with the number of special education cases that we need to consult on. And then the other legal fees are a bit sporadic, but that'll cover us there. Page 7, substitutes. So this line, we are proposing a pretty hefty increase over the current year budget. Over the past few years, we've maintained that budget level at $300,000. Our costs over the last few years have been well in excess of that, to the tune of between $400,000 and $450,000. This year's projecting to be about $450,000. FY22 was just over $450,000. This aligns with FMLA absences, paternity, maternity leaves, staff taking increased number of sick days. So we are optimistic that hopefully that trends down a little bit from that $450,000 level. But these, it will never, we don't see it maintaining back to the $300,000 level. So we feel confident in that increase there. Unfortunately, the cost of doing business right now. The next section of page 7, 3,000 student services. I want to apologize on the transportation line item there. You can see the proposal of $1,783,620. That figure is overstated by $79,800 because we had the late bus initiative initially included in that line, then realized that's not level service, right? We're proposing to add. So we took it out and put it up above, but that number should actually be $1,703,820 to reflect a 2.7% over the current year and not the 8 as is reflected. The 2.7% is the standard increase in our contractual rates with NRT bus. The homeless transportation and foster student transportation, these line items will fluctuate significantly on a year-to-year basis, based on students' needs in our district. Last year and this year, we've had some pretty hefty expenditures there. The year before that was very minimal. So again, feel it's prudent to increase those line items there to the tune of $15,000 total. On page 8, we start jumping into the facilities line items. The Newbury Elementary School, Pine Grove, and SES custodial and maintenance line items. There's 3 for each. We're proposing increases to align with the 7% inflation factor that we've used with other budgets that you've heard over the past few nights. Those are going to be on consumables. And then for the maintenance and repair, specifically the middle school, high school, we increased more than the 7% because of the deteriorating condition of the building, and we expect over the next couple of years to require more maintenance costs associated there. And a quick highlight, if you were to look at the actual expenditures for these line items over the last 2 years versus the budgets, we've been spending significantly more dollars than the budgeted amounts, because we've been fortunate to have one-time savings, such as for the health insurance premium holiday we had last year. We used those savings to catch up on some of these maintenance needs that we have. So if you look for a historical expenditure threshold versus the budget, you'll see that they don't quite align, but it's because we are playing that catch up. Looking at utilities, we are leveling all of those line items because we have our rates locked in for next year as well. So very fortunate. And then looking at our expenditure levels, they do align with those budgets. We're actually pretty much right on the mark. See, and then lastly, the grounds contract. We went out to bid this year for the grounds maintenance of our campus, and there was only one bidder on the contract. And unfortunately, there was a significant price increase. So we don't really have a choice on that one, but you can see the $60,000 increase in that line item. Jumping to page 9. And I apologize for going line by line here, but just a lot of meat to this. So this one, retirement insurance and fixed charges, stings a bit, that's for sure. Looking at a total proposed increase of $768,000 over last year. We're talking, Brian mentioned the variability in this budget right now is proving to be pretty challenging. Essex, right at the top of page 9, Essex County Retirement. That's a bill we receive every year for our share of providing pensions to our non-instructional staff. We're given a bill that's $187,000 more than last year. What plays into that increase is twofold. It's the condition of the market, some actuarial assumptions, but then also what hurt us this year more than other years is that our percentage, they take our salaries as a percentage of the group as a whole, and our percentage increased over last year. So that yielded a more significant increase than in past years. For the health insurance line items, we included a 10% rate increase estimate for right now. That is an estimate. Maya, they have their annual meeting this weekend, tomorrow and Saturday. That's where they establish their trend information for their trend rates for the coming year rather. And part of our latest renewal is stated that Triton's rates cannot increase more than the trust average. So we will know at this meeting what the trust average is because that's set. So unfortunately, don't have that number, but we wanted to put a conservative figure in there of 10%. We're optimistic, hopeful that will be less than 10%. And then baked into those changes too is changes in enrollment. So we took our current enrollment figures and applied that 10% rate increase. The reason which line item, MedX payments went down, which is our health insurance bill for retirees, That went down because we were conservative last year in our budgeting, and our rates were so phenomenal for retirees that it proved fruitful this year as well. Our property and liability insurance, you're seeing a pretty significant increase there as well. Had a meeting with our insurance broker the other day. This is relative twofold to the market itself. The cost of replacement, cost of repairs in this inflationary environment continues to go up. Also, our experience, I would say, is unfavorable over the last year. From a property standpoint, we had two significant claims, one being the flooding in the high school science room. That was to the tune of about $80,000. And then over at Salisbury Elementary School, we had a boiler that needed to be replaced that broke and was replaced through insurance to the tune of about $60,000. So all that's flowing through to our rates. And then actually I skipped over it, but our workers' comp insurance as well. Unfortunately, we've had a few long-term injuries of staff members, and that experience has significantly impacted our rates. Jumping to the last page, tuition, so school choice tuitions and charter school tuitions. We're looking at choice. This is the cost of students who live within our three communities who are going to other schools. That's looking like it's going to increase by about 95,000. Looking at the sending versus receiving this year, unfortunately, it's trending in that unfavorable direction where more students are heading out of the district than receiving into the district. Also factoring into that is we have, where's our figures here? In FY22, we had essentially 12 new students who choiced out this year as compared to last year. So that was yielding the cost increase that you're seeing for the $95,000. Of note, even though the number didn't fluctuate significantly, there are 13 students who are attending the online academy Tech TEC that we reference. So luckily, however, the changes in enrollment in our charter school tuition was favorable, where we can reduce that budget by $100,000 to offset that unfavorable trend for school choice. So all in, again, this line, I apologize, slightly off there. We're looking at, based on these estimates, again, a lot of variabilities that will have more clarity over the coming days and weeks. But right now, from a conservative perspective, looking at just over $1 million for operations, which is about 7.38% over last year. I covered a lot of material. Can take questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Kyle? Susanna?
Kyle, did you mention that Maya coming back this weekend with
Exactly, yeah. Thank
Okay.
you. So on that, Maya, they set their rates every year at their annual conference, which is being held on Friday and Saturday, where they'll establish the trust average. In our part of our renewal states that we can be our rates for next year can be no higher than the trust average. For right now, we have a 10% estimate baked into this budget proposal, but we're optimistic that those figures will be less than that.
Okay. Yeah, I think when we met with them last year, they kind of talked about not really seeing more than 3 or 4% increase, but I guess that's
Yeah,
interesting to see what they come back with.
I agree. I think the environment, at the meeting, they talked a lot about how they weren't seeing that, blanking on the word, but that where a lot of folks were putting off hospital visits because of the pandemic. They weren't seeing the wave back initially of those appointments. But then based on our experience levels, it looks that folks are actually going back to the doctor's office and incurring a greater level of claims. So that claim data wasn't looking as great as they had initially hinted at that meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for asking the question.
Does anybody else have any questions for Kyle? Paul Goldner?
I actually, you mentioned the FMLA absences when you're talking about the substitute line. I had talked about this with you about a year and a half ago, actually, or a year ago. But I would love to see what the cost or savings approximately to the district would be if we were to opt into the state paid family and medical leave. Because I remember looking at that and doing an estimate and seeing that it might save us $50,000 to $100,000 if we were to opt into that. I would just love to see what that breakdown might be as we go forward in this process.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'll, as part of our next meetings, I'll pull that information up that we had looked into that, as well as refresh my memory on the legislation and any changes that have occurred since then from a legislative standpoint, as well as our experience here at Triton, to see what a cost impact would be. So we can have all that out in the open. Absolutely.
So just to confirm, we have, depending on the collective bargaining agreement, we do have some parental leave. And again, test me on this, Kyle, as you're doing your research. I believe that has to be negotiated to offer that in lieu of any contractual leave that's currently in place through a bargaining agreement.
Correct. Twofold is the committee would have to adopt that legislation separately. And then if it is in lieu of our existing, it would have a contractual impact as well.
I see no one else wanting to ask questions. So I want to thank all of you here tonight, as well as our principals for their presentations. And boy, there's a lot of needs that are needed for our students. Our next meeting is going to be January 28th at 8 a.m. It's a Saturday.
Yep.
So bring your coffee.
We'll bring some too.
Yeah.
And can I just one more data point? Obviously, as Kyle alluded to you, we will get to you before that meeting as soon as possible. But probably midweek next week, a summary that you're used to seeing of all these requests. And we'll begin to do some of that work to identify what is, we have no choice, right? Kyle talked about the Essex Regional or our electricity bill, right? I mean, we have to keep the lights on. So the actual must-dos, what are those cost avoidance, building a program so we don't lose more kids? What are the higher priorities and the lower priorities? The other piece that we'll talk about, and I want to bring this up tonight because we will be speaking with our town officials at the DCC meeting next Thursday, correct? Yeah, next Thursday, prior to our meeting on Saturday. And certainly we'll be able to give them a heads up, and speak in kind of broader terms about, we're not going to rehash the next 3 nights, but certainly be able to speak to the challenging year that this is turning into. The other piece I feel like we have to mention to them then is the challenge we're going to have due to the fact that we have twofold. We're going to have incomplete numbers for our minimum local contributions and our foundation enrollment and how that impacts our member assessment. So we did partner with Mars, Julie Kelly, who's a consultant with Mars, and Melissa King, who is former DESE, now being contracted by Mars, to do the math on what our minimum local contributions will be for our 3 towns, as well as what our foundation enrollment is. The issue is that the governor has until, and she has signaled that she will take all of her time to produce the budget, which she has to have out by March 2nd. So we will have it in time. We will have what we normally get next Wednesday. and then we have for the workshop, so we can give to you, and if we do this, this is what this looks like, and if we do this, this is what the assessments look like. We're not going to have that level of specificity. So we're going to have to talk through next Wednesday how we want to issue a tentative budget. Back to the work that we contracted with Mars to do, with relative specificity, we know what our foundation enrollments are. Through this process, I learned after 18 years of doing this, the reason I could never, ever connect the dots and get to a foundation enrollment for each of the 3 towns. And I'm not going to go into the details, but it was literally at listening to Melissa and Julie talk about this. It's just the wacky world of DESI math. So the minimum local contributions, there's a range. Julie Kelly is a whiz and probably understands Chapter 70 better than the majority of folks across the state. But there are enough variables, including with the foundation enrollment as well, some factors for counting foundation. But specifically with the minimum local contributions, she had to take a guess on where some of those factors that contribute to each town's minimum will land. They seem like really educated guesses. She felt like if I was, basically said, here's what I think, but here's the range. The range is measured in multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. So as you all know, our funding methodology is every town pays their minimum local contribution. And then the amount that's above the collective minimum, each town pays their proportional share of that. Their minimum plus that proportional share is their assessment. So we first have the variable of not knowing what the first step is in the calculation. Second part is we always talk about one town getting whacked every year. So if the foundation figures, and they're going to be pretty darn close if they do shift. Last year, our total foundation enrollment was 2,203. We're increasing for the first time in I don't know how long to 2,224. So it's plus 21 students for our foundation enrollment. The problem is that Newbury went down 11, Salisbury went down 5, and Rowley went up 37. So those of you who have been around the horn a while know what that's going to do to the assessments right off the bat. So right off the bat, if we took this year's budget and layered in those numbers without any increase, we know Newbury's going to go back a few $100,000. Rowley's going to pay the majority of that. So just wanted to be able to, I want to be able to talk about that in just a forewarned is forearmed approach next Thursday with the town officials. But I also didn't want to say that to them without having that conversation here. And I want to be able to say to them, part of the work that we have to do, and hopefully we can have some kind of a formative discussion next Thursday night, is how we want to approach a tentative budget. Because we've always promised that it is the high water mark. And we can certainly give some guesses for assessments, but I think that will be very challenging if in the end, minimum locals shift 300,000, 400,000 for one town, and someone who thought they were going up 400 is now going up 800, that is going to be a problem, and that won't allow you all to live up to your promise of in essence, trying to give the town their high water mark. So happy to answer any questions if you have any of that. I'm glad we partnered with Mars. Certainly those are Julie and Melissa are brilliant women who understand this. And so they did yeoman's work trying to help figure this out. But until the state releases the final figures, there's some variables that they just can't predict. So there's that.
Does anybody have any questions for Brian? Okay. Thank you, Brian. Seeing none. All of you, thank you for coming tonight, and can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? We need a roll call vote. Erin,
Yes.
Susanna,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Paulise,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Narissa,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you all and have a nice night.
Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, and may the snow gods be on your side.
On my side or your side?